is on, it's going to be on a municipal shellfish program overview, and I'm going to qualify this presentation several times as I talk. Don't kill the messenger. These are the data that we have. So if you see things that are glaringly wrong, I might be able to explain why, and maybe I can't, but it's good for us to know why the data that we have maybe isn't accurate for the information that we're trying to convey. So the outline of the presentation is, I'm just going to tell you, first I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you about. Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of the history of municipal shellfish programs, then tell you about the laws and regulations very briefly. I won't bore you with all of that language. And then a description of the current programs. And here's my first disclaimer, is I use 2016 data because a lot of times we get the information so much after the fact for annual reports that we have a hard time getting it in and proofread before we would come to the forum. So even 2017 stuff isn't totally cleaned up. So now I'm going to spoon feed you what I want you to take away from this presentation. And there's a quiz at the end, so you better pay attention. What I want to do is describe the regulatory structure so people understand, because I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding about what actually the shellfish management programs in towns can and can't do. I want to highlight the range of municipal shellfish programs. So whether I've got the exact numbers right or wrong on any one of these categories is not really the point. What I'm trying to show is the absolute extremes of how various these programs are. And that you will definitely see. And then I want to begin a conversation about municipal shellfish management. Do we like it the way it is? Do we want to see some changes? Do we want to see some changes but not a lot of changes? Whatever, I just want to start that conversation. So the history of municipal shellfish programs, way back to 1821, the first Maine legislature placed the regulation of local clam harvesting with the municipalities. So that's really when municipal shellfish management started. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff that happened. I just pulled out a few highlights. In 1962, of 105 coastal communities, so these are towns that include places like, say, Alma, where there's intertidal flats, but most of it is not really productive clam flats, I would say. So there's 105 coastal municipalities, 78 had what they called at the time private and special laws for clam management. And it included 20 communities that cooperated with one or more towns. So I want you to remember this number because I'm going to make a joke in a few slides about that. In 1963, the private and special laws were repealed, and a statute law created the municipal conservation programs that allowed control of shellfish by town ordinances, which is basically the system we operate under now. And in 1977, Title 12, Chapter 623, 6671 was enacted, and that's basically like if you call us with questions about municipal shellfish management programs, that's where we always start, because this is sort of the Bible for setting up municipal shellfish programs. So current laws, I highlighted some of this stuff to try and zero in on the few things that towns can control. So this list is really important because anything outside of this list towns aren't allowed to do. So you can regulate or prohibit the possession of shellfish. What that means, I think, is up to a little bit of interpretation and how you interpret possession of shellfish. Fix the amount of shellfish that may be taken, so you can do things like say there's a 2-bushel limit per tide per person. Provide for the protection of shellfish from predators. Authorize the municipal officials to open and close flats under specified conditions, so that's where your conservation closures and things like that come in. And specify areas of the intertidal zone in which the dragging of mussels may be limited. So the towns don't actually manage mussels, but they are allowed to work with the department to come up with a list of flats where they want the department to either restrict or regulate intertidal mussel dragging. So DMR regulations, these are the 2 chapters that you need to pay attention to for municipal shellfish management. Chapter 4 sets up the Shellfish Conservation Warden certification process. So to become a warden, you have to go through a specific process, and then it sort of details what their duties and responsibilities are. Chapter 7 is the requirements for the municipalities that have shellfish conservation programs. So basically, Chapter 7 elaborates on that statute law 6671. So now I'm going to go through some statistics on shellfish programs. I'm going to cover licensing, revenue, expenditures, shellfish committees, enforcement, management activities, and landings. So municipal shellfish programs, and I didn't put a pretty background on these slides because there's a lot of numbers and a lot to read. 74 towns currently have municipal shellfish programs, so that's individual towns. 5 interlocal programs exist. This is where my joke comes in. These must be the same 20 towns that like to work with other people as, you know, back in the 60s, I guess. Booth Bay region has 4 towns. Damerscott and Newcastle is a 2-town interlocal program. Georges River has 5. I thought I fixed all my Frenchman's Bays. It's Frenchman Bay has 7, and Perry Pembroke is 2. And then there are 4 towns. So that means an interlocal agreement means that these guys have actually signed or created an interlocal agreement that means they all operate as one. So they don't have to submit separate reports. They don't do separate licensing. Their budget is all together. Their warden is one, et cetera, et cetera. There are other towns with reciprocal agreements, which basically means that the towns operate independently, but if you have a license in one town, it's good for the other towns. So Bristol and South Bristol and Deer Isle and Stonington fall into that category. Municipal licensing, 58 shellfish programs have commercial licenses. 8 shellfish programs have 5 or less commercial licenses, so some of these programs are pretty small. 25 shellfish programs have open licensing, which means that they're not limited in any way. 26 shellfish programs require conservation time, and 7 shellfish programs are recreational only. Commercial license numbers. The top 10 shellfish programs for licensing. So Waldeboro comes in, and here's where, like I said, you know, you might see some variation in these numbers. I asked my staff to help me check some of these, and we didn't see any, you know, huge outliers, but they may be off slightly. Waldeboro has the most licenses with 164. Perry Pembroke after that at 128. The Georges River Group at 122. Machiasport at 120. Deer Isle, Stonington together with their reciprocal licensing has 71, Harpswell 66, and so on and so forth. 22 programs have less than 20 commercial licenses. License revenue, and this is total revenue, so this also would include any recreational licenses that people sell, or, you know, PEC per day, or, you know, senior residents or non-residents, whatever, any category. The top 10 shellfish programs for license revenue, Perry Pembroke with 68,000, Georges River at almost 40,000, Frenchman's Bay at almost 35, Waldeboro at 26, and on and on and on. So that's what they're bringing in a year. The average resident commercial license is about $200, but the maximum is $580. So this is resident commercial only. There are also non-resident licenses you can charge half again or more than up to half again as much if they're over $200, I think. And the minimum price is $50. So across the board for all programs, that's the max and minimum on municipal licenses. This is not, you know, on top of this, people have to get their state license as well for a commercial harvester. So other revenues, account forward values. So this means like what the town has, they're reporting in their program that they're carrying a balance forward from year to year. So in 2016, those account forward values ranged from $500 to over $100,000. Fines collected, so these are, fines are another way of getting revenue, right? I guess some people look at it that way. In 2016, averaged $500, you know, for a given town or program, but ranged from only $40 in the town. I mean, there were plenty that had 0. Of all the ones that issued fines, the lowest was $40. And then one town had over $10,000 issued in fines. 22 programs reported collecting fines. So there are lots of programs that don't issue any fines at all. Very law-abiding. Expenditures. So top 10 shellfish programs for expenditures. So this is how much money is being spent. Now, if you look at this table compared to revenues, you obviously see there's a problem as far as like the revenues actually supporting the programs in some towns. That's not a requirement, and it just means that some of the money that's running these programs is coming from the regular tax base of those towns. So Harpswell reported expenditures of over $200,000, Brunswick at $72,000, Frenchman Bay $65,000, Freeport $54,000 almost, Waldeboro $38,000, and so on and so forth. The average expenditures were about $15,500 annually, but again, you know, you're getting the scope, I hope, of the variability of the programs, because the maximum was over $200,000 and the minimum was $25. Key expenditures. The warden's salary averaged a little bit over $12,000 for you know, when you average it out for all towns, but ranged from $261 to $163,699. That's a year. So that was definitely the highest cost category. Miscellaneous category, so some towns, so they have to report their budgets to us. This is where I'm getting all this information. It's coming from the annual reports. And then there's sort of like a miscellaneous category, so I don't really know what it was, but it averaged, towns were spending a little over $2,000, but it ranged from $13 in miscellaneous expenditures to almost $9,000. You know, one town reported $9,000 in miscellaneous expenditures, but I don't know what they were. Seeding activities averaged almost $3,000. Equipment averaged a little over $1,000. Surveys averaged a little over $1,000. And advertising averaged about $200. Shellfish committees. So 57 programs. So I told you there were 74 towns that have municipal shellfish ordinances, but because of how they're incorporated into larger programs, there's actually 57 programs and everybody has a shellfish committee. It was good to see, although it's not required, but everybody does have a shellfish committee. 44 programs report having regular meetings, so even though they have shellfish committee, it doesn't mean they meet regularly. And 50 programs say that they record minutes when they have meetings, so I would suggest that those other 7 programs start doing that. Because it's hard to know what happened if you don't record minutes at the meeting. The number of meetings per year ranged from 1 to 14 meetings. And I will say, back to the launch of the Shellfish handbook that's going to be released, there's a whole section that Dr. McGreevy helped with where it talks about running good meetings. And I think that some of the reason there weren't minutes collected at some of these meetings is maybe people just don't really have a lot of experience running meetings, and so hopefully that will kind of help people run better meetings in the future. So enforcement-wise, hours patrolled averaged about 500 hours per shellfish program, but it ranged from 22 hours in an entire year to 4,000 hours in an entire year. Numbers of harvesters checked ranged from 0 to 808. And warnings issued ranged from 0 to 36. And summonses issued ranged from 0 to 56. In Enforcement Outlook, I added this in. There's a bit in the annual report that says, you know, what do you need for enforcement? And I thought this was sort of interesting, so I put it in. 20 programs say they need more enforcement hours, 13 programs say they need better enforcement equipment, 12 programs say they need more staff, and 4 programs say they need more enforcement training. That is one of the reasons I focus on this, is because enforcement is very clearly one of the things that municipal shellfish programs have to do. Like, this is one of the things, the only things that is in the statute law as a requirement that they have to do. So management activities, this includes things like predator protection and control, reseeding or enhanced seeding, resource surveys, and conservation closures. Predator protection and control, 19 programs report conducting predator protection activities. So this would be fencing, netting, or trapping type of activities. Reseeding and enhanced reseeding, 25 programs report reseeding activities, so where they took either wild or hatchery reared stock and reseeded flats. And 13 programs reported enhanced natural seed set, in trying to enhance natural seed sets by doing things like brushing or roughing flats. Resource surveys, 22 programs report conducting at least a resource survey during the year, and 17 programs reported So of the people who were doing it, 17 of them reported to us that they had done 39 individual surveys. So some communities did obviously a lot more than just one survey. Conservation closures, there are 28 programs that report rotational flat management. So those are closures, you know, for anything from a project like doing a reseeding study or something like that to just doing winter digging versus summer digging. And then landings data collection, there are 13 programs that require harvester landings to be reported. So this is separate from the state system. The state requires landings are reported by dealers on a trip level basis. So when every harvester goes into their dealer and sells their clams, that gets recorded. You know, that this person sold me this many clams at this price, and that all gets submitted to DMR. But towns, 13 of the town programs also require harvesters to submit landings to them. And the advantage of that is that when it goes through the state, there are lots of confidentiality regulations that apply to it. And so you often, unless there are more than 3 dealers in the town, you can't release harvester level data. And so it has to get sort of rolled up, and often it gets rolled up into like a community, not even just the town, but the community, not the community, the county-wide landings is the finest resolution that the department can release to the public. So if a town is not independently collecting their own landings data, they can never get like CPUE or catch per unit effort kind of measurements that they might want to manage their own flats on a very small scale. So there's a real value to that with towns who do it on their own. That graph there is on the state landings, and it shows softshell clams value in 2017 were 2.2% of the total value of all fisheries in the state, with obviously lobster being 76.2. So it's really third in 2017 in terms of value. These are landings reported to DMR by town. You can just see a trend over the last 5 years of who lands, what towns are accounting for the highest landings, and sort of what the poundage is in parentheses if you're interested in looking at that. I can leave that up there when we ask some questions if people are interested in that. The last slide is just questions and discussion. You know, what we're interested in from a department perspective is, like I said at the beginning, should efforts be made to standardize programs? There's such variability. You know, should there be efforts made to sort of standardize the programs or not? Establishment of minimum requirements. You know, should there be certain things beyond just providing enforcement? And even the fact that we say you have to have enforcement, it doesn't say how many hours. We had a town that reported 2 hours of enforcement a year ago, and there's nothing we can say about it. They provided enforcement 2 hours in the whole year. There's no minimum standard. So we get a lot of flack as the department on, you know, saying, geez, you're not holding these towns accountable. I want a license, it's a clam club, you know, why can't I get a license? Why aren't you opening licensing? And we have nothing to work with. If towns are providing licenses, they're managing harvest. You know, they're doing like the basic bare minimum of a program to have a qualifying cash shellfish management program. And they have to provide enforcement, and it could be as little as 2 hours. So establishing minimum requirements is a question, and increased resources to support programs. I mean, I think it's really interesting what just happened with the Broadbridge Fund grant request and what a positive response they had from the number of communities that they did, and how there's clearly interest. You know, I thought it was great that there's this interest and obvious need for people to get not huge amounts of money to maybe really advance their programs. So I think that's kind of an exciting piece to work on. So this presentation is designed to be a conversation starter. As the department, we're going to continue this conversation and keep asking these questions in other settings. And we hope to get a lot of input from the public on what people think, you know, the future of municipal shellfish management should look like. So I'll take any questions if anybody has them. Yeah?
Well, the one thing I just wanted to say is we'd love to have more enforcement, but the towns can't really afford to have more enforcement what they do. It'd be nice if the state could kick in some money to aid towns with enforcement. That would go a long ways to having more enforcement. We do more than 2 hours.
Yep.
But I can see it is an issue, and we've had to raise our fees because the number of commercial claimants have gone down you had us for 71 in 2016. In 2017, it was like 52, and in 2018, I think it was 61. But it's a way down from what will support a program, you know, as we'd like it.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that if you have pretty robust enforcement alone, that license revenues generally can't even cover that, I would say.
Hence the idea for maybe some state help.
Yeah,
I know state revenues are
yeah,
not that robust either.
yeah.
Kohl, how many towns have the option to pay for their conservation? Waldeboro makes between 7 and 10 grand that way. How many other towns actually do it the way we do it? We have the option to pay instead of actually doing this.
That's
How
it.
many towns?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I didn't pull that out of the data or try to pull it out of the data, but that would be something that, as we move forward, you know, I can definitely pull that out and see how many towns are offering. Basically, what you're saying is differential licensing fees. So you have a fee for people who do conservation work, correct? That's reduced from a fee that people who don't want to do conservation work have to pay.
We require 6 hours.
Yeah,
But if you choose not to do your 6 hours, we will pay you, or you pay us minimum wage,
right,
which is $11 an hour.
right.
So you pay $66 and you do not have to do any conservation.
So this
We
came
have
out.
150 acres.
Yeah.
And most of them do not want to do work.
Which you know really highlights to me the issue with clan management and this you know co-management strategy that people really being invested in their fisheries. You know, and sort of a disconnect there. I think a lot of times in the clam fishery. But anyway, I don't know the answer to that question. How many people offer differential licensing? But we can get it.
Talent.
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
And the other thing, just to address that gentleman's thing on your warden, our warden is also a call. So we try to spread out as much, so the police force has to pay
Yeah.
for part of his salary throughout the year, and we have to pay part of it also.
But
So
lots
more
of
your
towns
warden-
don't have police departments.
Right, and you can also be EMS.
Yeah.
That's just an option to somebody else.
Yeah.
Kohl, I don't know, from what I've seen over the years, the standardized requirements for each town is so intricately different that what works in some towns doesn't work in other towns. Glenn and I just talked about this a lot. It's like every town is unique in its own way. And I'm glad that Pete and Dennis now are on that page that every town is so much different. That to make a law in Augusta that blankets the whole, every town that has a conservation, you know, shellfish is too broad ranging and it should be looked at in a different way than let's see what works for everyone. Because
Right.
what works for everyone doesn't work for everyone.
So the comment that's being made, if people didn't hear, is that, you know, towns are very different across the coast, and what works for one is not necessarily going to work for the other. And I think whatever, you know, if any changes are made, as far as requirements or standardization or, you know, metrics that towns would have to meet, it would have to be scalable. You know, you have to scale it with budgets and license holders and flats that are available to harvest and all of that, because it is very, extremely variable. Yeah. Yeah.
How does a municipality work with an unincorporated territory?
How does a municipality work with an unincorporated territory as far as having a joint program?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. Judy?
The UT in Washington County has their own warden, and they hire that warden and share that warden with some surrounding municipalities. So it's the same as if, so you're working through the UT and their supervisor, it's the same as if you consider the UT a municipality.
Right, they act as their own program, the Washington UT. I don't know if programs can like opt to, you know, other towns can opt to join that, or,
They
you know,
have,
they
they've
have.
shared warden services. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yep.
Personally, I would like to see more area biologists. I feel it's an effective conduit to us, but also too, given the challenges that we have in the shellfish industry, and we can all agree to disagree, whether it's too many crabs, too many of this, whatever it is. I think it's a really effective conduit The other thing is too, is I think the annual management reviews, I've been asking for them. I was glad that you compiled this information, because I think in the past 10 years, you know, it hasn't been assimilated like it used to. And to be of value to the shellfish harvesters, to you and to them, about what maybe some of the subtle differences are, because I think we're getting blindsided by some stuff. And, you know, there's a lot of effort that's put in with biology, with lobsters and stuff, and I don't think the shellfish industry gets as much. My own personal opinion, they can agree to disagree, but I think this is an important resource. And I think the towns do a lot, you know, trying to help with them and to keep our end up on it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted some of this data. I think it would be surprising how much money we have put into enforcement to, you know, help with the resource, try to afford our own programs. But, you know, if you don't have that effective information to work with, if you don't put it into some database that people can pull from to quickly identify some of the problems and the trends, we're always going to be behind the eight ball. And this is something I've been really disappointed in seeing. And I'd like to see a refocus, you know, on taking care of this wild fishery. It's a low-hanging fruit thing that I think that we can make some traction with. But there again, I think we need the support from the area biologists. So this information goes back to the towns. What's chapter 7? What, 6671? And sometimes you have to tell people 7 times. You know, Lord knows I've been doing it for years, but I have to step away and do something else. But, you know, I would just like to see more effort for that. Also, too, for the Shellfish Advisory Council, know what the shellfish budget is with the DMR. What money is being taken in, what money is being spent on. We used to do that before, you know, and have a say. You know, maybe one, you know, make an advisory thing. Maybe what should be charged more, what money should be spent, if you can, but anyway. All I've got to say.
All these comments. Anybody else? We have 1 minute. Okay. I appreciate everybody's attention for that. And our next section is a legislative update. And as Fiona mentioned at the beginning of the session, there was a change here. And Meredith Mendelson, our deputy commissioner, is going to come and speak to this session.